The sound of a prison cell door locking isn't like a normal door. It's a heavy, final thud that vibrates in your teeth. It's the sound of your life ending while you're still breathing. I sat on a thin, plastic-covered mattress that smelled like industrial bleach and desperation. I looked at my hands. They were shaking. Not from fear, I was past fear, but from the sheer, soul-crushing weight of the betrayal. 12 hours ago, I was Alara Vance, the supportive wife of Julian Thorne, the golden boy of tech. Now, I was inmate 4921. Julian didn't just break my heart. He framed me. He took 5 years of my loyalty, my ideas, and my silence, and he traded them for a plea deal that kept him in the penthouse and put me in a jumpsuit. As I stared at the peeling gray paint of my cell wall, I could still see his face in the courtroom. He didn't look guilty. He didn't even look sad. He looked relieved. "It's for the best, Alara," he'd whispered when they led me away in handcuffs. "The company needs a leader, not a scandal. You'll be out before you know it." The company. Our company. The one I built in a garage while he was out networking at bars. Code was mine. The vision was mine. But the paper trail. He'd spent 2 years making sure the paper trail led straight to my throat. I closed my eyes and leaned my head against the cold concrete. People think prison is about violence. It's not. It's about the silence. It's about the hours you spend realizing that the person you would have died for is the one who pulled the trigger. But Julian forgot one thing. He forgot that you can't break a woman who has already learned how to build something out of nothing. I didn't cry that night. I just started counting. Counting the days. Counting the names of the board members who turned their backs. And counting the millions Julian thought he had successfully stolen. He thinks I'm a fallen woman. He has no idea I'm just getting started. But as the first night in the dark set in, a shadow moved near the bars of my cell. A voice, low and raspy, drifted through the steel. "You don't belong here, do you, tech queen?" Froze. I wasn't alone. And in this place, the wrong company could kill you before you ever got the chance to get even. I didn't answer. In a place like this, silence is your only currency. The voice belonged to a woman named Martha, though everyone called her the ghost. She'd been in for 15 years. She knew the rhythm of the guards' boots, the smell of a coming storm, and apparently exactly who I was. "I saw you on the news," Martha whispered. "The embezzling wife. Julian Thorne's tragic mistake. You look smaller in person." "I didn't do it," I said, my voice sounding like gravel. "Honey, nobody in here did it," she chuckled, a dry, hacking sound. "But the difference between you and the rest of these girls is that you have eyes like a wolf. You're not grieving. You're calculating." She was right. Every time I closed my eyes, I wasn't seeing the prison. I was seeing the back-end architecture of Etheris, the software company I founded. Julian thought he changed the admin keys. He thought he scrubbed my access. But he was always a salesman, never a builder. He didn't know about the ghost protocol I'd buried in the kernel 3 years ago. It was a failsafe. A digital dead man switch that I never thought I'd have to use. But I couldn't reach it from here. I was trapped in a world of physical walls, while my empire was being dismantled in a world of fiber optics. The first month was hell. I was targeted. Julian hadn't just sent me to prison. He'd made sure I had a reputation before I arrived. The other inmates thought I was a spoiled socialite who'd stolen from the poor. I got a black eye over a tray of lukewarm mash. I spent a week in solitary for a fight I didn't start. But solitary was a gift. In the dark, in the absolute quiet, I did the math. I realized Julian's mistake. He'd left me with my mind. I started teaching Martha and a few others how to read the system. Not the digital one, but the one we were in. I traded my commissary credits for information. I learned which guards were crooked and which ones were just tired. I started building a new network. This one didn't run on silicon. It ran on favors and secrets. One afternoon during yard time, a guard I'd been helping with his daughter's math homework slipped me a crumpled piece of newspaper. It was a business section. The headline made my blood turn to ice. Julian Thorne announces engagement to heiress. Etheris set for multi-billion-dollar IPO. He was selling my life's work. He was moving on with a new woman and my billions. The IPO was in 18 months. That was my window. I had to get out, or I'd be watching my own funeral from behind a chain-link fence. Martha, I said, staring at the photo of Julian smiling. How do you get a message to the outside without the wardens knowing? Martha looked at me, her eyes narrowing. That depends. How much are you willing to burn to get your life back? Everything, I said. I'll burn it all to the ground. Good, she said, leaning in. Because the only way out of here early is through a man named the broker. But he doesn't take money. He takes souls. The broker wasn't a criminal in the traditional sense. He was a disgraced lawyer who lived in the shadows of the legal system. Through a series of coded letters hidden in legal filings, I made contact. I didn't ask for a breakout. I asked for a resurrection. I told him where the hidden accounts were, the ones Julian didn't know about. I'd been skimming my own profits for years, a rainy day fund I'd kept in decentralized crypto vaults. I gave the broker the keys to one. Get me a lawyer who isn't afraid of the Thorne name, I told him through the visitor's glass. And get me a new identity. By the time I walk out of these gates, Ilara Thorne needs to be dead. I want to be someone Julian never saw coming. The next year was a blur of violence and strategy. I survived 3 more attacks. I lost a tooth. I gained a scar on my shoulder. But I also gained a legal team working in the shadows. We found the hole in Julian's testimony. We found the witness he'd paid off, a disgruntled secretary who was now riddled with guilt and debt. The day my conviction was overturned on procedural errors and newly discovered evidence, Julian was at a gala. I walked out of the prison gates on a rainy Tuesday morning. I had no coat, just the clothes I'd been arrested in 5 years ago. They were baggy and out of style. I looked like a ghost. A black town car was waiting. The window rolled down. It was the broker. Your accounts have matured, he said, his voice like dry leaves. You're currently worth about $1.2 billion in liquid assets. Where to, Ms. Vance? I looked back at the prison walls. I wasn't Ilara Vance anymore. I was something colder. Not Vance, I said, stepping into the leather interior. From now on I'm Vesper Night. And I want to buy every single share of Etheris debt currently on the market. The broker smirked. You want to go after him now? No, I said, looking at my scarred hands. If I strike now, he'll just see a legal battle. I want him to see a goddess. I want him to fall in love with his own destruction. As we drove away, I saw a billboard for Etheris. Julian's face was 10 feet tall, glowing with success. He looked happy. He looked safe. He had no idea that the woman he buried was currently sitting in the car behind him, and she was no longer looking for an apology. She was looking for an ending. The first thing I did when I got to the penthouse suite the broker arranged was walk straight to the floor-to-ceiling mirror. I hadn't seen my full reflection in 5 years, not without the distortion of scratched polished metal or the fluorescent hum of a prison bathroom. I didn't recognize the woman looking back. My hair, once chestnut and soft, was now a jagged obsidian bob I'd cut myself with a smuggled razor. My collarbones were sharp, my eyes sunken but burning with a predatory stillness. I looked like a weapon that had been left out in the rain to rust and then sharpened until it could split a hair. You look like death, Vesper, I whispered to the glass. Good. Death is exactly what he deserves. I spent the next 3 months in a surgical recovery suite in Switzerland. I didn't want a new face. I wanted my face but perfected. I wanted the scars on my soul to stay, but the ones on my skin to vanish. I needed to be the Vesper Night the world was about to meet, a mysterious European-educated venture capitalist with a background so scrubbed it shone. While the lasers erased the marks of prison, my fingers were never off a keyboard. I was ghosting through the Etheris servers. Julian had become lazy. He thought he was untouchable. He was using the same encryption protocols I'd written in 2021. It was like he'd left the front door to his soul wide open. I watched him through his own laptop camera. I saw him drinking expensive scotch at 2 a.m., staring at the ceiling. He looked successful, sure, but he looked hollow. He was marrying Isabella Vance, no relation to me, just a cruel coincidence of a name, the daughter of a shipping tycoon. The merger would make Etheris a global monopoly. 8 weeks until the wedding, Julian, I muttered, watching his grainy image on my screen. 8 weeks until the IPO. 8 weeks until I take the air out of your lungs. I contacted Martha. She'd been released 2 weeks after me. A little gift from the broker I'd paid for in full. She was my chief of security now. She walked into the suite wearing a tailored charcoal suit, her gray hair slicked back. She looked like a high-end assassin. "The board members are restless," Martha said, dropping a folder on the table. "Julian is over-leveraged. He's borrowed against his own shares to fund this wedding and the new headquarters. If the stock price dips even 5% on opening day, the margin calls will strip him naked." "Then we don't just want a dip, Martha," I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. "I want a goddamn avalanche." Picked up the phone. It was time to make my first move. I called Julian's lead investor, a man who hated scandals but loved profit. "Mr. Sterling," I said, my voice pitched an octave lower, smooth and cold as silk. "My name is Vesper Night of Knox Holdings. I believe you're about to lose $500 million on a man named Julian Thorne. Would you like to know why?" The silence on the other end was the most beautiful sound I'd heard in years. The Metropolitan Museum of Art was glowing. This was the pre-IPO celebration, the night Julian was supposed to be crowned the king of Silicon Alley. Everyone who was anyone was there, draped in diamonds and hypocrisy. I arrived late. That's rule 1 of power. Make them wait until they're bored, then give them something they can't stop looking at. I wore a dress made of deep emerald silk that looked black in the shadows. It backless, showing off the flawless skin where my prison scars used to be. I walked in with Martha a few paces behind me. The room went quiet in ripples, like a stone dropped in a pond. And then I saw him. Julian was standing near the champagne tower, laughing. He looked younger, tanner. He looked like he'd never spent a second wondering if the woman he'd destroyed was still breathing. When his eyes finally met mine, he didn't recognize me. Not at first. He just saw a beautiful, powerful stranger. He straightened his tuxedo and walked toward me, that predatory salesman's smile plastered on his face. "I don't believe we've met," he said. His voice the same smooth baritone that used to tell me he loved me. "I'm Julian Thorne." "I know exactly who you are, Mr. Thorne," I said. I let the silence hang just a second too long. "I'm Vesper Night. I just bought the 40% stake in your primary server provider. Technically, I'm your landlord." The smile faltered. "Just a flicker. Knox Holdings. We've been trying to get a meeting with your board for a month." "I'm a hard woman to find," I replied, taking a glass of champagne from a passing tray. I took a sip, looking him right in the eyes. "I find that most people in this industry are far too loud. They talk about vision and innovation, when they're really just thieves in expensive suits." His eyes narrowed. "That's a cynical view for a guest at a celebration." "Is it a celebration?" I leaned in, my breath brushing his ear. "Or is it a funeral for a company that's built on a foundation of lies?" "I've looked at your source code, Julian. It's brilliant. But it's not yours, is it?" "Feels feminine. Like it was written by someone with a lot more heart than you." Julian turned pale. The tan seemed to drain right out of his face. He stepped back, his hand trembling slightly as he set his glass down. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't you?" Smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of a shark. "You look like you've seen a ghost, Julian. Maybe you should sit down before the auction starts. I'd hate for you to faint before I show you what I brought for the charity drive." I walked away, leaving him shivering in the middle of his own party. But as I turned the corner, a hand grabbed my arm. Strong. Firm. It wasn't Julian. It was his fiancée, Isabella. And she looked terrified. "Who are you?" she whispered. "And why did my father just get a text saying his shipping line is being investigated for the same fraud Julian's ex-wife went to prison for?" I looked at the girl. She was young, innocent, pawn just like I was. "Run, Isabella," I said softly. "Run before the building starts to burn. Because I'm the match." The next morning, the world woke up to a nightmare, and I woke up to a symphony. I sat in my office, 12 monitors glowing in the dim light. At 9:30 a.m., the opening bell of the New York Stock Exchange rang. Ethers was supposed to list at $85 a share. It was supposed to be the biggest tech debut of the decade. At 9:31 a.m., the first leak hit the Wall Street Journal. It wasn't a rumor. It was a data dump. 3 years of Julian's private emails, offshore account transfers, and the original unscrubbed version of the Ethers kernel, with my digital signature embedded in the deep-level metadata. Every single line of code he claimed to have authored was watermarked with the name Ilara Vance. The stock didn't just dip. Plummeted. $85. $70. $55. By noon, the Golden Boy was the lead fraud. The IPO was halted, but the damage was done. Because I hadn't just leaked the data, I'd spent the last month buying up Julian's personal debt through shell companies. Every loan he'd taken to buy his mansion, his yacht, and his fiancée's 10-carat ring was now owned by Knox Holdings. By me. I picked up the desk phone and dialed Julian's private line. He answered on the first ring. He sounded like a man who was drowning. "Who is this?" he screamed. "Vesper. What did you do? Why are you doing this?" "Check your email, Julian," I said, my voice calm, almost bored. "I just sent over a notice of foreclosure. You have 4 hours to vacate the Thorn building, and the penthouse, and the Hamptons estate. You can't do this. I'll sue you into the ground. I don't even know who the hell you are." "Oh, Julian," I sighed. I leaned back in my chair, watching the ticker hit $12 a share. "You always had a terrible memory for faces. Maybe it's because you never really looked at me. You only looked at what I could do for you." I paused, letting the silence stretch. I wanted him to feel the walls closing in. I wanted him to hear the phantom sound of a prison door locking in the distance. 5 years, Julian," I said. 5 years in a 6x9 cell. I spent 1,825 days thinking about this phone call. "Do you recognize me now?" There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. Phone dropping. The sound of a man hitting his knees. "Ilara," he choked out. It's impossible. You're supposed to be dead, gone, broken." I laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound. I was. But the thing about being broken, Julian, is that you get to choose how you put the pieces back together. And I decided to build myself into a nightmare. "Ilara, please," he sobbed. "We can talk. Can give you half. I can make it right." "You're right, you can make it right," I said. "The police are in your lobby right now, Julian. They have the original ledgers. The ones you thought you burned. Martha didn't just bring me coffee in prison, Julian. She was my courier. She's had those ledgers for years." Hung up. I didn't need to hear him scream. I had work to do. I had an empire to rebuild, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't doing it for a man. I was doing it for the woman in the mirror. But as I looked at the screen, a new notification popped up. An encrypted message from an unknown sender. "You think you've won, Ilara. You only took his money. You haven't seen who's really holding the leash." My heart skipped a beat. This wasn't Julian. Julian was a coward. This was someone else. Someone who had been watching us both the whole time. The message on my screen didn't just chill me. It felt like a physical hand around my throat. I had spent years thinking Julian was the architect of my misery. I thought he was the one who had the brilliance to frame me so perfectly. But looking at that message, a sickening realization began to crawl up my spine. Julian was a salesman. He was a face. He wasn't a mastermind. "Martha," I called out, my voice tight. She was at my side in seconds, her eyes scanning the room as if a physical threat had materialized. I pointed at the screen. The text was glowing in a harsh neon green. "You haven't seen who's really holding the leash." Martha leaned in, her face hardening into a mask of stone. "That's an encrypted relay from a server in the Caymans. High-level stuff. Lyra. Vesper. Whoever you are right now, this isn't the work of a panicked ex-husband." "I know," I whispered. I felt the ghost of my prison jumpsuit scratching at my skin. Julian couldn't code a basic firewall without my help. He didn't frame me. Someone framed me for him. Suddenly, the monitors in my office flickered. The stock ticker for Etheris disappeared, replaced by a live feed of the Thorn building lobby. I saw the police just as I'd planned. I saw the chaos, the reporters, the shouting. But then the camera panned. Standing in the corner, partially obscured by a marble pillar, was a man in a gray suit. He wasn't looking at the police. He was looking directly at the security camera. He raised a hand, 2 fingers mimicking a gun, and fired it straight at the lens. "Silas Vane," Martha breathed. My heart stopped. Silas Vane was the man who had funded Julian's first seed round. He was the silent partner everyone whispered about but no one ever saw. He was a titan of industry, a man who bought and sold politicians like trading cards. "He didn't just fund Julian," I said, the pieces clicking together with a sickening clack. "He used Julian to get to my code. He needed the Etheris kernel for something bigger, something military. And I was the only person who could stop him. So he had Julian remove me." The phone rang. It wasn't the private line. It was the desk phone. "Hello, Ilara," the voice said. It wasn't Julian's frantic whine. It was a deep, cultured rasp. "Or should I call you Vesper?" I must say the mysterious heiress bit was a touch dramatic, but effective. "You've successfully ruined a very expensive puppet." "Julian was your dog, Silas," I said, my grip tightening on the receiver until my knuckles turned white. "And now he's a rabid one. I've taken everything he has." "You took his money," Silas chuckled. "Money is paper. I have the patents. I have the data rights you signed over to him, which he subsequently signed over to me. You've destroyed the man, but you've left the machine perfectly intact. In fact, by tanking the stock, you've made it much cheaper for me to take the company private." He paused, and I could almost hear the smoke from his cigar through the line. "Thank you for the discount, Ilara. Now stay in your penthouse and enjoy your billions. If you try to touch the code again, I won't send you to prison. I'll send you to a grave." The line went dead. I looked at Martha. For the first time since I walked out of those prison gates, I felt a flicker of the old fear. But beneath it, something else was roaring. A white-hot rage that made the last 5 years look like a warm-up. "He thinks he won," I said, standing up. "He thinks I'm satisfied with Julian's head on a platter." "What are we doing?" Martha asked, her hand moving to the holster hidden under her jacket. "We're going to the one place Silas thinks is beneath him," I said. "We're going to find Julian. If he wants to live, he's going to have to tell me exactly how Silas Vane likes to bleed." The basement was thick with the smell of ozone and gunpowder. I pressed my back against the cold brick wall, my breath coming in shallow hitches. My center monitor was a jagged web of dead pixels, but the 2 side screens were still flickering. The progress bar was frozen at 99%. 1%. One tiny sliver of data stood between Silas Vane's exposure and my own execution. The boots on the stairs were slow, deliberate. This wasn't a tactical rush. It was a victory lap. I gripped the shard of glass until it bit into my palm, the sting keeping me grounded. Through the ringing in my ears, I heard a voice, cold, melodic, and terrifyingly familiar. "You always did have a flair for the dramatic, Ilara. But even a ghost needs a place to hide." It was Diane Halloway, my mentor, the woman who taught me that code was the poetry of the universe. She stepped into the dim light of the basement, holding a sleek, suppressed pistol. She wasn't wearing a lab coat. She was draped in a designer trench coat, looking more like a CEO than a scientist. Behind her, 2 mercenaries stood like statues. "Where's Martha?" I rasped, my voice cracking. "Your friend is sleeping," Holloway said, her eyes scanning my makeshift rig with a look of pity. "She's a relic of a physical world, Ilara. Just like you. You're fighting for truth, in an era that only cares about convenience." I looked at the side monitor. 99%. The upload was stalled because the primary uplink had been severed by that bullet. "Silas won't let you live after this, Diane," I said, trying to buy seconds. "You've seen the back end. You know what he's planning to do with the Aegis update. He'll scrub you just like he scrubbed me." "I'm not you, Ilara," she snapped, her composure slipping for a fraction of a second. "I'm an architect. I'm the one who turned your little predictive model into a god. I'm the reason this world will finally have order." She walked toward the desk, aiming the gun at the remaining hard drives. "Now, give me the encryption key for the Ghost protocol, and I might let you walk out of here. Silas wants the source code cleaned of your truth virus before the global launch." I looked at her, and for the first time I didn't see my mentor. I saw a woman who had sold her soul for the chance to play God. "You want the key," I whispered. I stood up, my hands raised. The shard of glass was hidden in the fold of my sleeve. "It's not a string of numbers, Diane. You should know me better than that." I stepped toward her, ignoring the mercenaries leveling their rifles. "The key is a heartbeat," I said. Lunged. Not at her, but at the secondary laptop I'd hidden under the desk. My fingers slammed onto the spacebar, the dead man's switch I'd rigged to my own biometric watch. The room didn't explode. Instead, every speaker in the basement, every phone in the mercenaries' pockets, and every siren in the street outside began to wail a single piercing tone. It was the sound of a system bypass. The progress bar on the side monitor jumped. 100%. "Upload complete," the automated voice whispered. Holloway's face went white. "What did you do?" "I didn't just send the data to the press, Diane," I said, a drop of blood trickling down my cheek. "I sent the kill code to every server running an Etherius kernel. Right now, across the globe, Silas Vane's empire isn't just leaking, it's deleting itself." Holloway screamed and raised the gun, but before she could pull the trigger, the basement door burst open again. It wasn't the police. It was the broker. And he wasn't alone. He was flanked by 3 men in dark suits with federal badges pinned to their lapels. Martha was behind them, leaning on the doorframe, a bloody bandage wrapped around her arm but a triumphant smirk on her face. "Professor Holloway," the broker said, his voice sounding like rolling thunder, "I believe the Department of Justice would like a word about the illegal surveillance of 300 million private citizens." Holloway dropped the gun. The mercenaries, seeing the tide turn, raised their hands. They were professionals. They knew when a paycheck had turned into a life sentence. But my work wasn't done. I didn't care about the professors or the hitmen. I grabbed my tablet and pushed past everyone, heading for the street. "Ilara, where are you going?" Martha called out. "To the top," I shouted back. I drove like a woman possessed, weaving through the chaos of a city whose digital infrastructure was currently resetting. I pulled up to the Thorn building, no, the Vane building, and walked straight through the lobby. The security guards were staring at their dead screens, powerless. I took the private elevator to the penthouse office. Silas Vane was standing by the window, watching the city lights. He didn't turn around when I entered. He looked older than he had on the screen. His shoulders slumped under the weight of his expensive suit. "You've cost me $4 billion in 20 minutes, Vesper," he said quietly. "A record, even for this town." "I don't care about your money, Silas," I said, standing in the center of the room. "I want you to look at me." He turned. His eyes were cold, but there was a flicker of respect there, the kind a predator gives to the one that finally caught him. "You're just like me. You think you're a hero, but you're just the person who was smart enough to win the war." "No," I said, holding up my tablet. "I'm the person you forgot to kill." And because of that, you're the person the world is about to see for who you really are. I turned the tablet toward him. It was a live feed of the news. His face was everywhere. But it wasn't just a scandal. It was a criminal indictment. My data dump had included the offshore transfers that linked him to the framing of Ilara Vance. The police are 5 minutes away, Silas, I said. And unlike me, you won't have the ghost protocol to save you. You won't have a friend on the inside. You're going to a maximum security cell. And I've personally ensured that your cellmate is someone who lost their home because of your predictive foreclosure algorithms. Silas looked at the tablet, then at me. He reached for a glass of scotch on his desk, his hand finally shaking. What now? He asked. You take over. You become the new queen of the mountain. No, I said, walking toward the door. I'm going to go get some sleep. And tomorrow, I'm going to give the Etherius patents to an open-source collective. Nobody should have that much power, Silas. Especially not people like us. As I stepped into the hallway, I heard the sirens. 100 of them, screaming for justice. 6 months later, I sat on a wooden bench in a small park in the middle of the city. I wasn't wearing emerald silk or a jagged black bob. My hair had started to grow back, soft and chestnut again. I wore a simple sweater and jeans. I looked like a person. Not a CEO, not an inmate, not a ghost. Etherius was gone. The company had been liquidated. The assets distributed to the victims of Silas and Julian's schemes. Julian was in a state facility, broken by his own cowardice. Silas was awaiting trial in a cell that I hoped was as cold as the one he'd put me in. Martha sat down next to me, handing me a coffee. The open source collective just released the first patch, she said. They're calling it the Vance Protocol. It's a privacy shield that can't be bypassed. You've made the internet a safe place again, Ilara. Vesper, I corrected her with a small smile. I think I'll keep the name. It reminds me that even in the darkest night, there's a star. I looked at the children playing on the grass, at the people walking by, their lives uninterrupted by the digital cage that had almost been built around them. They didn't know my name. They didn't know I'd spent 5 years in hell to keep them free. And that was okay. Real power isn't about being seen. It's about being the person who makes sure the light stays on for everyone else. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, a weight I'd been carrying since that heavy metal door first slammed shut. I wasn't defined by the betrayal anymore. I wasn't defined by the revenge. I was defined by what I chose to build after everything was destroyed. I looked at the camera. At you, wherever you are, listening to my voice. Life has a way of trying to bury you. People will lie to you, they will use you, and they will try to convince you that you are nothing more than the mistakes they forced you to make. But remember this. You are the architect. You own the code of your own life. And no matter how deep they bury you, if you keep your mind sharp and your heart fireproof, you will always find your way back to the sun. Don't wait for someone to save you. Be the person they never saw coming. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, and if you've lived through something similar, share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.